So with the change in the settlement and driving the changes that taking the compensation out of the multiple listing service, we also obviously made some changes to the listing contract. We've updated the listing contract in some various ways. There is a complete video explaining each paragraph of the listing contract and how to explain it start to finish, which is a new 5-page agreement. Part of it's just layout, but there are two really major changes that were made because we had to address the compensation. We had to address if you're the listing agent and you bring the buyer, commonly known as a double dip. Lastly, it's also going to address seller paid concessions for the buyer. And so let's get started. So the first section is really number 4, and that's the compensation. So as you can see the language, so if during this listing period anyone produces a ready, willing, able purchase buyer to purchase the property under the terms that they listed in, they're going to pay us a commission equal to X percentage plus an additional fee. So the additional fee is any transaction fee you would ask. So this is where you would put the percentage. Now normally you may have put you'd put a 7% commission in here, or maybe the additional transaction fee that you had, or whatever you agreed to with the seller. This is a real change because what the fee you're putting in there now is just the listing portion. So if you were listing it at 4 and you were paying out 3, this is where you would actually put 4% in there. Because this is all the work that you do, marketing the property, negotiating the terms, and bringing them a ready, willing, and able buyer. So after that, the next line though, when it says, however, under no circumstances, so the above commission agreed be less than, that's actually where the minimum commission goes. So if on the listing side your minimum commission is $3,000, that's where that number would go. But this is, when you're looking at this, this is the fee that you are getting as the listing agent. The next line is a change. It also then addresses what happens if you actually procure that buyer. So in the next line, in the event the listing agent procures the buyer, the total commissions will be equal to, so if you were charging 4, and if you brought the buyer and you wanted to charge an additional 2%, that number would be 6% on that line. Now guys, obviously these numbers and your transaction fee would go on that next blank. Obviously these numbers will change on market depending on the price of the house and depending on what you're doing. So the very first line is just the first number is what, when the house successfully sells. The next one is the total of you adding on the fee for you, the listing agent, double dipping it. Now guys, I will make a comment in here because I think this is important. When you think about I'm going to address this in the listing presentation. When you think about what happens here, before you were showing a total commission, you were explaining in your value proposition everything you did, and then you asked for 6 or 7% or what that number is. When you think about this, this is almost half of that number. So in some respects, it puts you in a very powerful position. You're still going to offer all these services and value proposition, but you're only talking about the amount of money you're charging, which actually should be much easier to do when you think about that. So the next section is concessions. So we do address the concessions right after that, and whether the first one is whether the seller wants to offer potential buyers concessions through the multiple listing service or not. So it's actually a yes/no question. Do they want to offer or they do not want to offer the multiple listing service? So this, and what's very important that you explain to them, this invitation of offering to pay that service is really contingent on all the other terms of the offer being acceptable to them, and it's really the sole discretion of that seller. Also, if it's offered in there, it's not binding that they pay that amount of money unless it's the terms they agree to. The next line, and that is optional. That's an optional part. So the next part is that the seller is willing to offer to pay buyer's concession of either a percentage or a fixed dollar amount. Now we'll go further in the negotiation class, in the listing presentation, whether you'd want to do a percentage or a single dollar. We'll talk a little bit more about that.